And sorry, I'm quite frazzled from this right now, but I'm just going to run through some quick housekeeping. So as we've all seen, this session does provide interpretation. Please go to the interpretation to choose your language channel. I believe Roula and Fish have mentioned that they have told you which channel corresponds to which language. And we'll also put that in the chat in a bit, just to be clear for everyone. And welcome everyone to the session of GSWF. Sincere apologies. Can everyone please mute themselves? Yeah. Sincere apologies for the technical issues tonight. If everyone could please turn off your videos, this will help us conserve bandwidth and make sure everyone has a good experience during the session. Please do also mute your microphones now and close any unnecessary programs. Feel free to use the chat box to engage with one another during this session. This session is also being live streamed and the recording will remain public on the ERAW YouTube channel. I believe it might also be streaming to Facebook at the moment. ERAW Asia Pacific is committed to making GSWF an inclusive and safe digital environment, and we will not tolerate harassment of any kind, including but not limited to deliberate intimidation, sustained disruption of discussion. Participants are obliged to be respectful and to avoid replicating societal prejudices and inequalities. Participants who engage in disruptive behavior may be removed without prior notice. That's all for now. I'll turn this over to the session organizer. Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, good morning, wherever you are. This is Fish from the IDWF, the International Domestic Workers Federation. We are happy to host this session on the first day of the Global South Women Forum. We are the third forum for today. And today we are talking about money, economic system, and domestic workers. The topic is following the money, the Kafala system and chain of domestic workers migration. Meaning we are talking about how domestic workers are being trained by the Kafala and also how the chain of migrant domestic workers migrating from their home country, leaving their families behind and then going to the destination country to take care of the families in a foreign land. So today we are very happy to have 4 speakers to talk about this money and care and domestic workers issue, and also the push and pull factors in the process of migration. Since you know there are many migrant domestic workers, and with COVID-19, when the economy is going down in many countries in the whole world, I can tell you the number of domestic workers, number of migrants will be only increasing in the economic downturns. So that's why that makes our topic more important for today. So we are very sorry for today's being late because of the technical issue on the arrangement of interpretation channels. You know, IT things can never be always on our hands of control. So we will have 2 parts, basically. The first part, we will be understanding the benefits, who benefits from the lack of laws and protections of domestic workers. We work hard, we got domestic workers exploited, but who is benefiting? So what is in behind when we talk about the economic factors, the push and pull factors? And then on the second part, we will be visioning for the future, how we want to make a change. As this Global South Women's Forum, we want to disrupt the macroeconomics. So that's why all of your participation are so important. Meanwhile, please have a look at your computer or mobile, whatever device you are using. There is a chat box. Feel free to leave your hello first, introduce yourself, your name, your country, and your organization. And also feel free to express your opinion, leave your questions, yeah, whatever you want to express. So today we will have a very short section, an hour for the sharing. And coming to you, we will hear the sharing from 4 speakers. First, we are very delighted to have Marina Durano. She is holding the Women's Rights Program for the Open Society Foundation program. She is, of course, so experienced on women issues and economic issues. So let's start. We hand over to you, Marina. We would like you to share how care labor as productive labor is not counted as economy. We receive very low salary and even unpaid. Why the money factor behind is like this? And what is the economic value of the paid domestic workers? Hand over to you, Marina. Good
Thank
morning.
you and hello to everyone here. This is really a very exciting panel, and I love that we are challenging what macroeconomics is and challenging the future of our economies so that we can build a better economy. So I want to start with macroeconomic policies and the amount of power that there is located by macroeconomics policymakers. Policies directly affect our daily lives. It sets the stage for changes in the prices of goods and services. It has an impact on the chances of getting a job, on whether we can afford to import oil or whether our food we grow can be sold to other countries. Macroeconomic policy goals include the expansion of commodity production and services provision, both in the private markets and in the government sector. When a country is in crisis, which is where we all are now, macroeconomic policies can be designed to boost the economy through outsized impact of government spending that creates the demand for essential goods and services, and that in turn encourages many companies and corporations to keep operating and for workers to keep jobs or find jobs. When it comes to care, however, things get a bit complicated. For one, care work is not recognized in macroeconomic policies as a productive activity. So macroeconomists, policymakers do not think that care work contributes to economic growth. So there is a first problem there. It is not a valuable activity. And yet we all know that caring for others, cooking, house cleaning, laundry, making sure that medicine is taken or that we are wearing masks, all contribute to improving the well-being of those who receive care. If these caring activities stop, people will experience hunger and malnutrition, unsanitary living conditions, delayed recovery from illness, or increased infections. In fact, there appears to be an arbitrary definition of when something is productive and when not. That is what is going on right now. And even more puzzling is how productive activity valued in macroeconomics cannot occur without the caring work that wives, mothers, grandmothers, and domestic workers especially do almost nonstop all day. So you can't go to work without the domestic workers doing their work. And yet, the economy does not recognize the contributions of care workers and domestic workers. So if we begin to recognize the contribution of care work as part of the economy, various studies have estimated that the contribution can be anywhere from 20 to 60% of a country's production. In India, it's 39%. In South Africa, it is 15%. In Guatemala, 26 to 34%. In El Salvador, it's 32%. And even in rich countries, the contribution of care work to the economy can be as high as 35%, which is the case for Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, or just under 20% as in South Korea and Mexico. Now, these are estimates only for the unpaid care work. So we actually have to add the figures that value the paid care work, which is what domestic workers do and other household workers do. And yet there are not many estimates that provide information regarding the contribution of domestic workers to the economy. But in an article in South China Morning Post, there have been attempts to try to value that contribution. And in Hong Kong, domestic workers contribute to nearly 4% of the entire Hong Kong economy, which is about $12.6 billion. That's a lot of money. In Singapore, it's a little more than 2% or about $8.2 billion. In Malaysia, about $900 million or less than 0.5%. These are not small amounts of money. If domestic workers were paid the minimum wage, or even better, if they were paid a living wage, these figures would increase immensely. So migrant domestic workers not only make economic production and growth possible, but they also where they work, but they also contribute to the home country where they came from. The value of the money that domestic workers contribute to their home country's economy is so important. The government in sending countries have formalized procedures for leaving to work abroad. In 2019, global remittances reached $550 billion. And there are many countries that rely on remittances to keep going. For example, Tonga, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Haiti, and Nepal have remittances that comprise more than 25% of their economy. The amounts are so huge, they're bigger than the export earnings of these countries. Meanwhile, India, China, Mexico, and the Philippines are the biggest remittance receivers. But what really is for sure the evidence that remittances are extremely important is that banks and many financial institutions are attempting to capture the money that is being sent back. Money transfers companies take about 7% for every $200 that is sent back home. Banks charge higher at 11% of the money that is sent back home. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa, the cost is averaging at about 9.3%, but in some countries, the cost is really 20% of the money that is being sent home. This is the case for Angolans who wants for money being sent from Angola to Namibia, or money being sent from South Africa to China, to Angola, and to Zambia. 20%. That is hard-earned money needed by families at home for basic needs, so every cent counts. And that is why one of the SDG targets is for these remittance costs to go down to 3%, but we will see. I don't know if that will happen. So for all the benefits that an economy derives from care work and from migrant domestic workers, macroeconomics has not been able to recognize their importance. Not enough for them to change the way they design their policies. With proper recognition, macroeconomic policies would be designed in ways that expanded public services for care, that regulated financial institutions, that recognized domestic work as a profession with appropriate training and skills development, among other supporting mechanisms, including social protection. Instead, what we see right now is that governments see domestic workers as a band-aid solution to their economic problems in the balance of payments when a country cannot afford to pay for the imported products or cannot afford to pay for foreign borrowings. The remittances of domestic workers are used to pay for these foreign spending. also the reason domestic workers have to find work outside is because they make very poor and ineffective employment policies. And finally, they're always cutting budgets. So let me end here and hope that our visions of a care economy will actually result in restructuring the policies so that the people who deserve to be recognized are actually recognized and supported. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for Marina for a very rich presentation with a lot of numbers. So
Sorry.
all these numbers are meaningful. It represents the hard-earned money by the domestic workers, care labor that we earn for the country, for the world. So Marina has talked about the GDP that the care labor has brought, the migrant workers sending remittance, the unpaid care labor for the contribution to the economy, and also the bank charges, the brokers, the financial institute who earn so much through the remittance process from the migrants. So all these, they grab the money from the poorest workers, and that are the care and domestic workers. Thanks again for Marina Durano for the very rich sharing with a lot of numbers. So before we go to the next, I'd like to remind you, we are having 8 interpretation channels going on. We have Arabic in the Arabic channel, Bahasa Indonesia in the Russian Zoom channel. We have Bangla in the Zoom Korean channel. We have French in the French channel, Khmer Cambodian in the Japanese Zoom channel. We have Spanish in the English channel. So if you are listening to English, just stay in the floor. And this, if you are listening to Spanish, please choose English channel. And we have Thai interpretation in the German Zoom channel. And also, as you can see, we have Nepali sign language going on. So we would like to hand over to a migrant domestic workers who have been many years working in Kuwait, where a country where there are Kafala system, where the migrant domestic workers are being trained by the employers, and as a migrant domestic workers leaders, as of the Sandigan Association of Domestic Workers, she is going to share with us what makes the migrant domestic workers migrate. What are the money economic factors? What are the policies in the origin countries that influence them? And Anne is a Filipino and working in Kuwait. Hand over to you, Anne. We are very happy to have you on board.
Thank you, Fish. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. So my topic is about push and pull factors. Most of the studies indicate that migration is primarily motivated by economic factors. In developing countries, low agricultural income, agricultural unemployment, and underemployment is considered basic factors, pushing the migrants towards developed area with greater job opportunities. The common push factors are low productivity, unemployment and underemployment, poor economic condition, lack
Sorry, Anne, you are muted. Cannot hear. Anne, you are muted. Okay, please repeat for the previous.
It's okay now. Okay.
Yeah, we hear you now.
Yeah. Introduction of capital-intensive methods of production into agricultural sector and mechanization of certain process reduce labor requirement in rural areas. The non-availability of alternative sources of income in rural area is also important factor for migration. The pull factors are opportunity for better employment, higher wages, facilities, better working conditions, and attractive amenities are pull factors of an area. Migration is a complex phenomenon where macro, meso, and micro factors act together to inform the final individual decision to migrate, integrating the simpler previous push-pull theory. The post-millennium surge in global remittances amounting to a net transfer of $689 billion to the global south in 2019 has courted significant policy attention around prospects for migration development. The World Bank and the Migration Policy Institute have heralded temporary labor migration as a triple win: a win for migrant workers, for the countries they hail from, and for the countries they work in, with remittance positioned as the vital benefits for migrant households and countries of origin. The argument assumes that remittances allow poor households to overcome poverty and make investment while providing much needed foreign exchange earnings at a macroeconomic level. In the Philippines was the fourth largest destination for remittances by overseas workers in 2019. According to the World Bank's Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development Program, data indicate that remittances to the Philippines amounted to $35.1 billion in 2019, up 3.7% from a year earlier, behind only India, China, and Mexico. Remittance flows represent one of our most stable sources of foreign currency, and at the same time, they augment domestic incomes as family members send home cash. The technology transfer of Filipinos gaining better skills abroad also helps improve the capital stock of the workforce. On the flip side, being away takes a toll on the fabric of society with loved ones far away. Some negative implications for overseas Filipino, not to mention cases of maltreatment in some jurisdictions. In Sri Lanka, almost similar push factor with India and Bangladesh. Sri Lanka is one such remittance economy that has become increasingly reliant on temporary labor migration. While Sri Lankan women have among the highest literacy rates and highest levels of healthcare access in South Asia, they experience many forms of gender-based violence and gender inequality, including discrimination in economic activity. An important factor influencing women's decision to migrate was their inability to earn sufficient income in Sri Lanka. Men are significantly higher salaries in male-dominated informal sectors. Some of the factors that contribute to women's decision to migrate for work are gender-specific and differ from those relating to men's labor migration. Remittances of Sri Lankan migrant women workers' wages are an important source of foreign exchange for the country's economy. In African countries, images of thousands of African youth drowning in the Mediterranean, propelled by poverty or conflict at home and lured by the people of jobs abroad, have fed a narrative that migration from Africa harms rather than helps the continent. Economic, social, and ecological factors can force people to leave their villages and their countries. Pull factors from the side of the richer countries would not be so strong if there would not be push factors in the countries of immigration. Civil wars, brutal dictatorship, ecological disasters, and especially starvation and terrorism are the decisive factors threatening people's lives and forcing them to leave their countries. In many countries of Africa, we find such push factors actively endangering people's life. Migration in and from Africa is also shaped by the complex social and political factors facing the continent which contribute to a decision to migrate. In recent years, we have seen an increase of human trafficking within and out of Africa. Gender discrimination and unequal working conditions make women and children particularly vulnerable as they are often trafficked. Trafficking is difficult to track and extremely profitable to traffickers. Any country of origin policies that regulates the migration highly affects and influence the migration. Most of the policies aim to impose protection mechanism though some were created to focus on building a remittance country than focusing on migration development. This lead to easier migration like state-owned recruitment system for abroad, zero payment of the worker for the recruitment costs, and etc. Without a doubt, remittance sent by migrant workers to their respective country of origin have played an important role in promoting economic development in this country. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Anne,
please.
for the lively sharing. These are like a really comprehensive analysis from her as an experience as a person who has migrated, being a migrant domestic workers abroad in Kuwait for so many years. She talked about the push factors for migrant domestic workers out of poverty, conflicts, politics, dictatorship, climate change, and also sometimes it's the government and human trafficker who push these women to migrate, and they are temporary migrants. So this is a specific characteristic in Asia and Middle East is now coming up from Africa, migrating to Middle East as well. All these migrants who work abroad for many, many years, even for over 30, 40 years, they don't enjoy any benefits. So destination want their labor, want their youth, cheap labor. At the end, they have to send back like with no money at all back to home. And what Anne is saying that we want at the end, these migrants are being forced to migrate. So this is not what we want. We hope the migrant domestic workers can migrate free of our own will. So thanks so much for Anne's sharing. Now I'd like
Thank
to
you.
invite the next domestic workers. Sorry. Now I would like to invite my colleague, Roula Seghaier. She is our IDWF strategic program coordinator based in Lebanon. So now she's coming to you again talking about money from Kafala system who is benefiting. So she is sharing with you based on a research on the who is gaining the money in their pockets out of these cheap labor and migrant domestic workers. So hand over to you, Rola. We look forward to your sharing. Talking about money again.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So I have shared the research with you in the chat box. You can find the research called Cleaning Up the Shady Industries Behind the Kafala System. And to start us off, the Kafala system, for those unfamiliar with it, is a sponsorship that ties a migrant domestic worker to her employer in countries of the Middle East and the Gulf. That means they are not included in the international or the national labor laws and are entirely under the authority of the employer. Lebanese employers save money by avoiding the obligation of paying minimum wage and by avoiding the obligation of providing job protections. But that is only one layer of what is happening under the economic front. Because of the discrimination and the injustice of the kafala system, 1 to 2 migrant workers die per week in Lebanon. And despite all of the historical attempts to reform or abolish kafala, it is met with big scrutiny because the Lebanese system is based on sectarianism, meaning that there is a balance of power that relies on a demography of particular religious fractions. And the Lebanese worry that extending rights to migrants, migrant domestic workers or refugees, everybody included, would mean extending citizenship, which would hurt the country's demographic. But that is also one layer of the reasons pushing back against reform. So usually when we think of the kafala system, racism is brought up from a cultural perspective, that you have a lot of workers coming from the global south and the country is xenophobic and it is expressed through its institutions. But this is only one layer also to the manifestation of racism, because in fact it is racial capitalism that we see. If we can showcase the first illustration that we have, it is on the distribution of the cost per ethnicity. The domestic workers that are recruited in Lebanon, the employers have to pay recruitment fees, and these recruitment fees vary according to an implicit color scale. Everybody knows about this, but it is no convention and no law, and it is definitely against all standards of human rights, racial and migration standards. So abolishing the kafala does not only mean working on racism, but also working on racial capitalism, because the economic factor is clear, as you can see within this implicit color scale on the screen. And abolishing kafala would deal a significant blow to the commercial interests in migrant worker value chain, which relies on the cheap labor, as my colleagues have explained. Recently, Lebanon has tried to create a unified labor contract. You can remove the picture now. And the unified labor contract was stopped in the highest administrative court in Lebanon. It was first meant to extend some basic protections to domestic workers, and that were very minimal. And yet, the syndicate of owners of recruitment agencies have challenged its validity, and they won. And this is because they have made their case that the economy, their own economic interest, and the economy of the country relies on a system that is so unjust. So the study that I have put in the chat was done by Triangle with the support of IDWF, and it studied numerically how much money does the government and the private sector make off the backs of the domestic workers. The estimates were based on 2019 through the numbers of domestic workers that registered in the General Security as new workers or through renewals of their work permit. This means that irregular workers are not accounted for, and the irregular workers are in big masses currently in the country. And once they will try to exit the country and travel, or once they will try to regularize themselves, they would still have to go through the General Security and pay their dues for the years that they have missed. So the estimates that we have are limited estimates, and yet they explain how much the government and private sector benefit monetarily. These costs are incurred from the recruitment fee, the residency, the labor permit, the health checks with mandatory pregnancy tests, other administrative costs, some costs that are unclear that go towards bribes and the accompaniment of domestic workers within airports. Some costs go to brokers and sub-agents in countries of origins. And we can see the split of these costs in the distribution between the private and public sector on the illustration on the screen, please. Can we pull up the illustration? Okay, so in 2019, there were a total of 33 domestic workers coming to Lebanon and registering through the General Security. 14,000 were Ethiopian, 7,500 were from Ghana, and around 4,000 were from Philippines. They have paid to the recruitment agencies around $57 million, and to the General Security $6.5 million for residency permits, and 29.9, almost $30 million for the renewal of their documents. So this amounts to $36.5 million for General Security, and the Labor Ministry also received 5.3 million for labor permits, in addition to almost 800,000 for authorization fees. In addition to this, some recruitment fees go to insurance firms, domestic workers do not benefit from a great insurance, but because of the regular checkups that are imposed on them as parts of the limitations of the kafala, limiting their freedom of mobility, also monitoring women's bodies for access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. There are some checkups that are paid for. They are not for the worker, but against the worker. The entirety of the expenditure is about 100 million US dollar annually for Lebanon. And these numbers are only for those regular registered workers. So to conclude, you can bring me back on the screen. The domestic workers not only provide a source of cheap labor for various Lebanese stakeholders, such as recruitment agencies, governmental agencies, general securities, but the government does not only manage to cut the institutional care cost by having migrant workers take care of the bulk of care work in the country, but it also manages to make them pay for it, literally not only sidelining and cutting costs that they should be paying, that the government should be paying, but also having domestic workers be in debt bondage and be paid meagerly and benefiting the national economy in this sense, which means that any reform for the kafala needs to start from an economic perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Roula. So I don't know how do you feel, everybody. I feel a total feeling of unfairness when these cheap labor, if we're talking about only 30,000 domestic workers in Lebanon, they already contribute, no, not contribute. The private sector, the agencies and the government units has been already earning 100 million US dollar from only 30,000 domestic workers who entered in Lebanon. Imagine in many countries we have 10 times, 20 times more than this number of domestic workers in many destinations. And you can imagine how much more money is putting into the pockets of the private recruitment agencies and the government agencies. So this is totally unfair. So that's why today's topic, we are talking about the kafala system, where the domestic workers are trained for the train of money to go into the private and government sectors, which is unfairness. And we are talking about the most important labor, which is care for the family, for the society. Thank you, Roula, again for your very rich sharing with the money, telling us the total unfairness that we are facing by domestic workers and in the world. So before we, I'm inviting the next speaker, I'd like to ask for the audience to allow us to have a bit 15 more minutes for the session. Initially, we should be ending by 10:15, but because we started late, please allow us to run 15 minutes more, meaning until 10:30 p.m. Kula Malaysian time. So I hope you can understand us and can stay with us until the end. And we have already 110 participants here. Welcome you all again. This is Fish from the International Domestic Workers Federation at the Global South Women Forum, talking about money and domestic workers. So now, the last but not the least, the speaker, Ruth Kakame. She is a domestic worker as well, but now she is an organizer at KUTEA, the Kenyan Union for Domestic Hotels, Educational Institutes, Hospitals, and Allied Workers Union in Kenya. So she will be talking about the domestic workers returnee from the Middle East and the Gulf coming back to the Kenya, and she will be sharing how the experience goes and what her union is doing for them. So I'd like to hand over to Ruth from KUTEA Kenya, please.
Thank you, Fish, for this. Unfortunately, I'm not able to disable my video. I don't know whether that is okay, but I want to share about our Kenyan context and what is happening in the space of migrant domestic workers and returnees. Kenya has between 100 to 300 migrant domestic workers in the Gulf region. This is according to the report that was presented by the Ministry of Labor in the country. And particularly in Saudi Arabia, our recent research actually shows that we have over 29,449 migrant domestic workers who have been cleared in this between March last year, 2019, and January 2020. And if you look at some of the push and pull factors, we have socioeconomic and environmental conditions within the country. Kenya is known as a very rich sending country of migrant domestic workers to the Middle East, and this has been happening in quite a number of years. Middle East has been taking in low-skilled and low-skilled migrant domestic workers because of also low cost of labor that is accorded to them. Majority of these workers work in the domestic sector, in construction sector, in hospitality sector, where they require low skills. And some of the pull factors include they always run to Middle East because of opportunities for better life. In Kenya, looking at employment opportunities, we have very high levels of unemployment. Even looking at the region around, it's very difficult for these workers to gain access to even developed countries. So most of them, because of issues of also literacy, issues of job requirements, and in this case low cadre types of employment opportunities, these are some of the factors that will push them to go to the Middle East. And apparently, we've also had programs with issues of technology and high requirements qualifications for jobs, considering that majority of those who are moving, especially to take domestic workers' jobs, are in the uneducated category. And some of these fail to meet even all the requirements that are required for them to get career jobs or formal jobs. So because of this opportunity to get higher income that is considered higher than what is paid here locally. And these are now some of the reasons to, the cycle of migration, having returnees moving every other now and then, moving around Middle East countries, hopping from one country to the other because of, issues of unemployment and sustainability of their lives back in the country. Looking at returnees' contribution in the economy, in 2019 alone, according to the presentations that were done by the Ministry of Labor, the average monthly remittance that returnees contribute and migrant workers in general contribute to our economy is about $228 million US. This is a lot of money that these people are contributing and making our economy move. And some of the issues looking at how these returnees are being, reintegrated back into the country, you find that out of all, the situations, the exploitation they go through, being taken advantage of because of how informal their job is perceived to be. Kenya as a country has no bilateral, we don't have regional and multilateral agreements to facilitate transferability and portability of social security benefits among, among Kenya and destination countries. So it becomes very hard to even provide, protection to these workers financially. So it has been a problem for even how these returnees come back to the country and them fitting into the country. Apparently, the recent Lebanon blast exposed some of the gaps that are there for returnees when they come back to the country. Majority will come back, and because of there's no clear policy on how they'll be reintegrated back to the system, how they are going to be absorbed back to the system, most of them will venture into the informal economy. And the informal economy is really rising up so fast. Majority of these returnees that are recruited to the Middle East by employment agencies fall in the youth category. And these youth, when they come back, because of so many, in the informal sector, maybe trying their means to survive, and when they are not able to survive, they reconsider going back to Middle East to try other jobs. It doesn't matter how their experiences were previously, but it is always Middle East has always been viewed as a destination where, because of qualification levels of employment, considering low skilled in the domestic sector, where majority will settle to get employment, because of also difficulty in accessing chances to move to other developed countries. So Kenya as a country, especially on returnees, with the recent blast in Lebanon that I was talking about, has really been an eye-opener on how these returnees are integrated back to the system. We as a country, we've not been able to to consider migrant domestic workers as people who really should be taken care of in terms of even signing bilateral agreements that protect them, that will even facilitate their absorption when they come back to the country. Some of the government's efforts have been to form a national referral mechanism for returnees when they come back to the country. And it's so unfortunate that most of these services are not accessible to returnees when they come back to the country. So as a union, we started organizing returnees so that we also get to understand the issues that they go through and interact with them, so that also the situations that they go through in countries of where they were working before in the Middle East. And some of the programs that we've been running, we formed a migrant network coalition, and this is now comprised of different civil society organizations, and these are civil societies that are doing advocacy around migrant domestic workers and human trafficking. This coalition, part of what we do is that when a returnee comes back to the country, we connect them to service providers that handle specialized and individualized support. In terms of, we have those that offer psychosocial support on trauma therapy for those that come back when they are distressed and they need counseling. And we have those that need, they need physical care in terms of accessing shelter. When dealing with returnees, you realize that there are those that traveled because they wanted to, they are going there to work and to get greener pastures, so that when they come back, they're coming back to sustain their families. But unfortunately, when it doesn't end so well and they have to be deported and repatriated back to their country, most of them, because of embarrassment, having not met their expectation, wouldn't even want to go back to their families. They'll want to be kept in a shelter for them to to heal. So we have institutions that also offer physical care in terms of providing shelter for them as they undergo trauma trauma therapy and counseling. We have those institutions that offer healthcare for those that come back and they are they are victims of injuries, Some of them have been abused physically. Some, you know, because of also torture they went through, they want to undergo medical reviews. So we have institutions that offer healthcare. We have those that do empowerment and life skills. As a country, we have a number of, you know, efforts from the government, especially on providing even loans to groups and individuals who are returnees to start business. This may not reach out to all returnees because you realize even through the process of recruitment, some will just come back in the country silently and no one knows that they are back in the country because one of the gaps is that even as they moved out, they did not feature in any data. So even coming back, tracing them becomes a problem. So for those that come in through us, we try to connect them to institutions that offer life skills so that they can get vocational training for them to be able to be integrated back into the system and get themselves actively involved in programs that will really build them up. Because you realize that even with migrant workers, as they move outside the country, they go there to learn new skills. Some of them come back as expertise in other areas that they didn't, they left the country without. There's also, you know, transfer of knowledge, whereby there are those that had successful, you know, experiences, and they want to encourage others on how their relationship were with the employers that led them to having good employment, you know, industrial relations at the workplace. So, so those are some of the things that we are doing in that network. And there's also legal assistance. Legal assistance is for those that directly complain to us, and we realize that the issue can be handled directly from the country with those you know, stakeholders that are involved directly in the country, especially with employment agencies that Roula was talking about, on issues of, you know, paying high fees for recruitment, you know, issues of, you know, not undergoing proper medication. Someone gets to destination countries and they realize they have other conditions that with the temperature in other side, they are not able to work. So we also look into the gaps, especially during recruitment, and which channels were the channels through which they went through recruitment were right or wrong. We also do general advocacy on, you know, improving and promoting safe labor migration, starting from Kenya while on transit until they get to countries of destination, and now actively engaging the government to advocate for the gaps that are within the labor migration component, and also trying to negotiate on other gaps that the government needs to address for these workers to move successfully. Yes, I'll stop at that, Fish.
Thank you very much, Ruth Kagame from Kuteya, Kenya, for the sharing. And it's a sharing of our real life of the migrant domestic workers in the world economic system, where you can hear for the returning migrant domestic workers, it doesn't gain the economic benefits for the domestic worker themselves and also for the country itself. Not only because there are many abuse happening, as you heard earlier from Roula, even from Lebanon alone, 1 to 2 migrant workers die every day. And also, as you can hear from Ruth, when the migrant domestic workers returned, they don't have skill and career ladder to climb up and left with the informal economy. And even they have to go back to the Middle East country in the exploitation chain again. And so that's why Kuteya, Kenya, the union is doing a lot of work to do advocacy. So a correction to my earlier saying about how many migrant workers die is every week in Lebanon, 1 to 2 migrant workers die. Emergent only in Lebanon alone. So these are the economy, money, and our real life situation. So that's why this Global South Women Forum, we want to disrupt the macroeconomy. We want to redefine the economic system, because our issues in the intersection and oppression related to the gender issue, for us being women and some of us with LGBTQI, and because of our economic status, due to poverty, we migrate, because our ethnicity and race from countries where we are based in the global south, we are the colored. So that is very much result in all these economic exploitative system that we are facing today. So now I'd like to invite all of you to leave in the chat box your opinion. We talk about the situation. How shall we vision for the future? Now we are coming to the end of 2020, 2021, and more years in the future. What are you visioning? And especially many of you are here, domestic workers, and leaders. Please share with us in the chat box your visioning for future, your visioning for changes. And we will have a little bit, 10 minutes more. I would like to invite the 4 speakers to share with us your visioning for change. I ask Roula to speak first, and then Anne, followed by Ruth, and then Marino Durano. Yeah. So visioning for change for the future. Roula, please, hand over to you.
Thank you. So key concerns and what I have described in the situation in Lebanon are the male guardianship, immigration policies, border closures, national security law, lack of access to information, inability to negotiate private and public space, and the overlaps between both in women's recruitment within the informal economy. Also paired with the informality or like the irregularity that domestic workers fall under if they did not migrate to Lebanon through the standardized channels. So the vision for the reform is multiple, like some of it has to do with migration policy, some of them have to do with labor laws. But if I am to say in general, there is no ethical contract under the Kafala system, so we need to be abolishing it. And a starting point would be through either putting domestic workers under the national law or ratifying international conventions such as the Domestic Workers Convention 189, and to put a labor law coverage in line with CEDAW and ILO, which has redress mechanisms backed up by certification, and working on access for domestic workers to all of these redress mechanisms.
Yes, really, we need that. We want that. It's a must. Ratify C189, the ILO Convention on Domestic Workers. Recognize domestic workers as workers. No more slave, no more abuses. That's crucial for everybody and governments. So Anne, what do you think? Visioning for future. Anne from Kuwait Sandikan.
Yeah, creating legal channels and bilateral agreements with respective countries for all those who came newly and illegally into the country of destination would be an important step forward. Today, women migrants contribute to the future of tomorrow's citizen. Their migration experiences and the remittances they send to their origin countries play a role in shaping the conditions of the continent's structural transformation. While many women are aware of the working condition they will encounter in the destination country, occasionally the risks are beyond expectations. Nonetheless, hearing their voices implies moving from moral judgments, especially in case of existing bilateral agreements to the design of policies and measures that would optimize their contributions to the socio-economic development path to their origin countries.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, there is
And
much, yeah, okay.
sorry, you go ahead.
Yeah. Well, there is much debate about the benefits and pitfalls of migration. One fact remains clear: migration is here to stay. What has often been termed as a migration bump refers to the fact that migration will continue as long as there are large discrepancies between the economic generated in the national and host countries. Thank you.
Thank you. And we need a sustainable future for our families and for everybody to be able to have the care and love that they need. And without the government's will, political will to impose and ratify and adopt proper policy and laws, we won't have that. We won't have the fairness, care, and love for everybody. We don't want anybody to suffer anymore. So how about you, Ruth? Ruth from Kutea, Kenya.
Yes, treating domestic workers with dignity that they deserve, because labor rights are human rights. If we give priority to the human rights that these domestic workers are accorded to, then it will be a leeway to start recognizing and appreciating the work that they do. Then in our context, we are yet to finalize on migration policies. And there are some of issues that really need to be captured, especially on systematically informing domestic workers on their rights and opportunities in destination countries to facilitate their social and economic integration when they come back to the country. Then in these policies, they should be very clear and accord different service providers so that the domestic sector can enjoy working outside the country. Service providers in this case can be even, cases of litigation. Sometimes a worker may call us all the way from, destination countries for us to intervene in their cases. And we have to run around and look for people to assist us and intervene in this case. So if litigation is considered on how these workers can lodge complaints, how, they can be listened because they are human beings, they can be listened, they can express themselves, then it can turn around the shift on, appreciating care work that domestic workers are giving out, and also recognizing the value of the work that is invested in the domestic sector. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. We want to ensure the migrant domestic workers who work hard with a hard-earned money, that little money, not so little, but we want it to be more with a policy setting. And when they return, they can earn a decent life. Otherwise, they will be also abandoned again by the country and abandoned by their families being poor. So, okay, last but not least, we will have Marina Durano talking. You are talking about the number and the economy, money. So we want you to
Yes.
end with money,
Thank-
but money in a decent term with fairness.
Absolutely. And I promise no more numbers. So I agree with all the previous speakers that the ratification of ILO Convention number 189 is really a very important starting point for any recovery plans of recovery from the pandemic. But I would add to that also the ratification of C-190, or violence in the workplace, where we have already Fiji, Namibia, and Uruguay as taking the lead in ratifying this. So we know that the pandemic and social isolation has increased the number of domestic violence experienced by women. So the combination of C-189 and C-190 to be ratified is particularly important for today. Moving forward, I'm hoping that we can create a new vision of a care economy that recognizes and values care work. And this is especially so for the contributions of the domestic workers. There is ongoing work right now to try to estimate the contributions of both paid and unpaid work to the economy, care work to the economy, starting with a pilot project in South Korea that is led by feminist economists. This project is an attempt to create a model that showcases the interaction between the standard notions of an economy with the care work that has so far been invisible. And we hope that we'll understand better not only how much care work contributes, but that we can conduct simulation exercises, policy exercises that allow us to look at how these two parts of the economy interact with each other. It's still ongoing work, so hopefully we'll see the results next year, and we will try to have a better basis for formulating a different type of macroeconomic policy. There are also ongoing projects in the city of Bogota and in the government of Argentina to design integrated systems of care. These government entities are identifying the care gaps and care needs of their populations so that public services can respond to them. The city of Bogota only started last year with the election of the new mayor, while Argentina has been holding interministerial meetings to discuss what reforms are needed for the federal government to be able to meet the demands for care. Feminist economists in both are involved, and the hope in Argentina is to have a draft bill, begin drafting the bill next year. And I'm sure that Carmen Brites, the vice president of IDWF, will be part of this process. But while these projects have not, the problem with these projects is that they're at the starting point. So actually what we need to do is reach out to these policymakers to make sure that the migrant workers and the migrant domestic workers are part of their design process. So Bogota, for example, needs to look at or confer and consult with the Venezuelans who are in their city. Meanwhile, the Argentinians may want to speak with the Paraguayans who have been domestic workers in the country moving forward. But in both and everywhere else who maybe that's interested in pursuing this approach, domestic workers unions are especially important for making sure that the recovery process and the new vision of a care economy incorporates their demands. But the one that needs really a lot of work are the macroeconomists themselves, the planners themselves, the policymakers themselves. So that the next step that we need to do is to bring together the work on designing integrated system of care with the work on the macroeconomic modeling, policy exercises, so that together they will create enabling environments for the system of care to be sustained and to be sustainable. So we hope that with the type of research that is going on right now, we can actually speak with the macroeconomists so that there will be a shift in their mindset, using their language. So we are asking macroeconomists to change their approach so that their theories, methodologies, and their policies fully account for all peoples, especially the fundamental fact that no economy can continue without care work. So as unions and governments are moving ahead with their reforms and their recovery policies, macroeconomists need to catch up to be relevant in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. It's a very great sum up for today to redefine the macroeconomy, the economic system, and to make a change on this, what Marina has mentioned, the most important is the voices of all of you, the voices of domestic workers. So we keep on organize, mobilize, and fight for the change. And in Argentina, they are going to have a new policy to redefine the care gaps, and that is also because there is a very united domestic workers, UPAC, which is IDWF affiliate in Argentina. So all of these need all of you to come, collaborate, and effort and stand up. So there has been a lot of sharing, and there is also questions. And I think one of you has asked about, is it possible if people in the Global South, country in the Global South to unite? Yes, of course, we need all of you to act and stand up. So thank you, everybody. It's very wonderful to have all of you here to be with us for this a little bit more than 1 hour session to talk about disrupting macroeconomics with the topic following the money, the Kafala system and chain of domestic workers migration as part of the program of the Global South Women Forum. So this is the first day. The forum will go on for 5 days until December 18, which is the International Migrants Day. So we will keep you busy and brings the moving your head and mind and heart around. And thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoy the session. And the session will be also shared in YouTube in the ERA, the organizers' social media channel as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you especially for the speakers, Marina Durano from OSF, Roula, our colleague from IDWF, Ruth Kakame from Kuteya, Kenya, Mary Ann Bunda from Sandigan, Kuwait Domestic Workers Association. Special thanks to the organizer, ERA, for this to make up all this setup, and especially for the interpreters. Without you, many of our participants from the Global South cannot attend. Thank you, everybody. Good night, good day, wherever you are. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye everyone. Keep safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Goodbye, good night, good day.
Good night, good day.
Good to know you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you, everyone. It's really informative. Blessed to be this. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Good night from Papua New Guinea. And God bless you all.
See you tomorrow.
See you all tomorrow.